My name is Charles Coleman, and at 72 years old, I believed my life's great conflicts were confined to the pages of the books that line my walls. Then my daughter got engaged. When I asked her what time the engagement dinner was, her voice was a study in casual cruelty. "Oh, we already had it yesterday. Just close family." She didn't know I had already paid for her entire wedding, a wedding that was about to be canceled, because when she called me days later in a panic because her credit card was declined, I had only one thing left to say to her. Before I continue my story, please do me the honor of telling me where you are listening from in the comments below. And if you believe that family is built on respect, not convenience, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. My library has always been my sanctuary. It is the quiet heart of my home in Philadelphia, a room built of dark walnut and worn leather, smelling of old paper lemon oil and the faint sweet scent of my late wife Rose's favorite perfume, which still clings to the curtains after all these years. The walls are not merely decorated with books. They are lined with them floor to ceiling, a dense tapestry of human history. Gibbons and Herodotus stand shoulder to shoulder with Du Bois and Baldwin. It is a room built for contemplation, for making sense of the long, tangled narrative of humanity. And lately I had found myself trying to make sense of the tangled narrative of my own family. That evening I was at my desk, the soft, focused light of a banker's lamp illuminating my work. In my hands, steady despite their age, I held a piece of my own history, a photograph from the 1920s showing my grandfather standing proudly in front of the small barber shop he had built with his own two hands. I was carefully restoring it, mounting it onto an acid-free page of a heavy leather-bound album. It was to be my gift to my daughter Lena for her wedding. Not just a collection of pictures, but a story, a tangible reminder of where she came from, a legacy of pride and quiet dignity. As I worked my fingers gently brushing away a speck of dust, my eyes landed on a more recent photo I had set aside. It was of Lena, taken on her university graduation day. She stood in her cap and gown, her smile so wide and full of promise it seemed to light up the whole photograph. Looking at that smile, the joy of that day felt as real as if it were yesterday. But it also triggered a more recent, more unsettling memory. A memory of a dinner where I felt that brilliant, promising young woman begin to slip away from me. I was happy for her, of course. A father's primary wish is to see his child find a happiness that will outlive him. But a shadow of unease had settled in my heart, a disquiet that had a name, Kevin. I could still vividly recall the first time I met him just a few months prior. Lena had chosen one of those new, ridiculously expensive restaurants where the plates are large and the food is small, and the silence is filled with the low hum of people talking about money. Kevin was the very picture of modern success, with a perfectly tailored suit, a brilliant white smile, and an expensive watch that he seemed to consult more often than necessary. He greeted me with a handshake that was a little too firm, a little too eager to establish dominance. Throughout the dinner, he spoke not of art or travel or even of his love for my daughter, but of portfolios, assets, and market projections. He treated conversation like a business negotiation, and I felt as though I was being interviewed for a position I didn't want. "The market is volatile, of course," he had said, swirling a glass of obscenely expensive wine, "but for high-net-worth families, volatility is just another word for opportunity." He had looked at me then, a practiced, assessing glance. "Lena tells me you were a history professor. Fascinating. History is all about patterns, isn't it? Just like the market." He was trying to build a bridge, but the materials were all wrong. He wasn't interested in my life's work. He was trying to translate it into a language he understood, the language of profit and loss. The moment that truly chilled me came with the dessert menus. He leaned forward with a conspiratorial smile, the kind of smile a card shark gives you right before he deals the final hand. "You know, Charles," he said, using my first name with an unearned familiarity with the proper estate planning, "Lena's inheritance could be optimized to yield a much higher annual return. We should really talk about your current asset allocation. There's a lot of unlocked value there, especially in real estate. A house like yours in that neighborhood, it's practically a dormant asset." I remember looking across the table at my daughter. She was beaming at him, her eyes shining with admiration. She didn't hear what I heard. She didn't hear the cold, calculating words of a man appraising her father's home as if it were a stock to be sold. She saw a man who was worldly and practical, a man concerned with securing their future. I saw a man taking inventory of my life's work before I was even dead. I saw a man who looked at my daughter and saw a shortcut to the life he felt he deserved. I, a historian, could see the pattern. It was the oldest one in the book, a marriage of alliance, a merging of assets, a conquest disguised as love. And in that moment, for the first time, I was truly afraid for her. I returned to the present, the memory fading, but the cold feeling remaining. I looked down at the album, at the faces of my ancestors who had worked so hard for so little, and I knew I had to do something to protect their legacy and my daughter from the man who saw them all as nothing more than unlocked value. That unsettling dinner was the reason I felt compelled to speak with her alone a few days later. I found her in the kitchen, humming to herself as she made a pot of Earl Grey tea, filling the room with the scent of bergamot. The afternoon sun streamed through the window above the sink, the same window where her mother Rose used to grow orchids that bloomed even in the dead of winter. For a moment, watching her move with an unconscious grace that was so much like her mother's, she was just my little girl again, the one who used to follow me around this very kitchen with 1,000 questions about dinosaurs and ancient Rome. My heart ached with a love so fierce it was almost painful. It was that love that forced me to say what needed to be said, to risk her anger to protect her future. I leaned against the doorframe, a silent observer, until she turned, saw me, and gave me a bright, easy smile. "Hi, Dad. Want some tea?" It was the perfect, gentle opening. "I'd love some," I said, walking over to the familiar kitchen table and taking my usual seat. "Lena." I began, my voice deliberately soft, not wanting to put her on the defensive. "I only want what's best for you. You know that, don't you?" She brought 2 of Rose's favorite porcelain mugs to the table and sat down across from me. Her smile was still in place, but a flicker of caution had entered her eyes. She knew this wasn't just idle chatter. "I know, Dad. Of course I do." I took a breath, marshaling my thoughts. I was a historian. I knew that the most effective arguments were built on evidence, not emotion. I had to present my case logically, calmly. "This man, Kevin," I started, watching her expression carefully. "He seems to be more interested in your financial future than he is in your heart. When a young man meets his fiancé's father for the first time, he usually makes an effort to speak about his love for his daughter, his hopes for their shared life, the little things that make her special to him." Kevin spoke about asset allocation and optimizing an inheritance. I let that observation hang in the air between us, as tangible as the steam rising from our mugs. "True love, my dear, is built on a respect for who a person is, their thoughts, their spirit, not for what they possess. It's about shared values, not shared portfolios. A man who only looks at your ledger will be the first one to leave you when the numbers on that page change. And believe me, the numbers in life always eventually change. History teaches us that fortunes rise and fall, but character, that is the bedrock." It was a warning delivered from the heart of a father who had seen a lifetime of human nature, who had read 1,000 stories of ambition and betrayal in the pages of his history books. But Lena did not hear it as a warning. She heard it as an attack on her judgment. Her smile tightened, losing all its warmth. Her back straightened. She placed her mug down with a soft, definitive click. She reached across the table and patted my arm, a gesture that was meant to be comforting but felt deeply condescending, as if she were placating a confused, senile child who didn't understand how the world worked. "Oh, Dad," she said, her voice laced with a weary fondness that stung more than any angry words could have. "You're so old-fashioned. You're taking it all too literally. You have to understand the world is different now." She took a sip of her tea, composing herself, choosing her words as if explaining a complex subject to a slow student. "Kevin is a financial advisor. It's how his mind works. He sees the world in terms of security and growth. When he talks about our future, of course, he's going to talk about finances. That's how he shows he cares. He's not being greedy. He's being practical. He's making sure our future is secure. This is how the world works now, Dad. It's not the 1970s anymore." Her words, meant to dismiss my concerns, only confirmed my deepest fears. She wasn't just defending him, she was parroting his philosophy. She was looking at me, but she was seeing me through his eyes, a relic, a man out of touch with the real world of finance and ambition. The chasm between us in that moment felt a mile wide. My world was one of books, ideas, and the slow, steady accumulation of a legacy built on character. Hers was becoming one of assets, portfolios, and the relentless, anxious pursuit of more. I didn't push it. A professor learns that you cannot force a student to see the truth until they are ready to look for it themselves. To argue further would only drive her more firmly into his camp. It would make me the enemy, the obstacle to her happiness, and that was a role I would not play. I simply nodded slowly, the picture of weary acceptance. "Perhaps you're right," I said, the words feeling like a betrayal of my own instincts. "Perhaps I am just an old man who worries too much." She relaxed immediately, her bright smile returning now that the conflict had been averted. "Exactly," she said, relieved. "Don't worry so much. Kevin adores me and I adore him. Everything is going to be perfect." But as she spoke, I saw the reflection of the giant glittering diamond on her finger, and I knew that her definition of perfect was now inextricably linked to the cold, hard calculus of finance that Kevin had taught her. She had heard my words, but she had not listened. The warning had been given, and it had been utterly and completely ignored. As I finished my tea in a heavy silence, I felt a profound sense of loss. It was the feeling of a historian watching a predictable, tragic chapter of history begin to unfold, knowing he was powerless for the moment to stop it. The warning I had given my daughter settled between us like a fine layer of dust, unseen but present in every interaction that followed. I gave her space, hoping my words might germinate in the quiet of her own thoughts. But a few days later, any hope I had for that was decisively crushed. I was in the hallway, polishing the old grandfather clock my own father had given me, a task I found meditative, when I heard Lena's voice drifting from the living room. She was on the phone, and from the bright, animated tone, I knew she was talking to him. I did not mean to eavesdrop, but our house built in an era before television and constant noise was designed for voices to carry. Her words reached me with perfect, devastating clarity. No, the budget is not the issue," she was saying with a laugh that sounded a little too loud, a little too forced, as if she were trying to convince herself as much as him. "Dad's finances are very well managed. We just need to find a venue that reflects the kind of event we want. Something exclusive. Something worthy of the Prescott name. You know, the Prescott name. Not the Coleman name. Not our name." My hand stilled on the polished wood of the clock. The rhythmic ticking that had been a comfort for 50 years suddenly sounded like a countdown to something I did not want to see. It was a small thing, a simple turn of phrase, but to a historian, words are never just words. They are artifacts. They carry the DNA of an idea. And the idea here was one of conquest. It was the language of a vassal paying tribute to a new king, a willing assimilation into a more powerful tribe. My family's legacy, built over generations of quiet hard work and academic achievement, was being erased, deemed unworthy of being mentioned in the same breath as the name of a man I had met only once. I heard her continue, her voice dropping a little, becoming more conspiratorial. "Of course my father will handle the payments. He set up a dedicated account for it years ago. It's all very straightforward." She said it with such casual entitlement, as if she were discussing a corporate expense account, not a fund built from a lifetime of my wife's hard work as a dentist and my own modest salary as a professor. The love, the sacrifice, the careful planning, all of it was being reduced to a simple transactional line item: Dad will pay. I retreated back to my library before I could hear any more the scent of lemon oil, suddenly sharp and bitter. A cold wall was being built between us, brick by invisible brick, and I was on the outside of it, a stranger in the blueprint of my own daughter's future. The official announcement came the following Sunday. Lena came over for dinner, and as she helped me clear the plates, she held out her left hand, the diamond flashing under the dining room lights like a distress signal. It was a gaudy, ostentatious thing, so large it looked heavy on her slender finger, completely out of character for the daughter I thought I knew, the girl who used to prefer collecting sea glass to playing with dolls. He asked, and I said yes. She announced, her smile wide and bright. I did what any father would do. I hugged her, told her I was happy for her, and made the appropriate admiring sounds about the ring. "It's beautiful, my dear," I said, and the lie tasted like ash in my mouth. My late wife, Rose, had worn a simple gold band, elegant and understated. She used to say that a ring should be a symbol of a promise, not a statement of a man's bank account. This ring wasn't a symbol, it was a billboard. Later, as we sat with coffee in the living room, I tried to breach the wall I felt growing between us, so I began keeping my tone light. I imagine there will be a party to celebrate the engagement. It was a natural question. Our family, though small, was part of a large, tight-knit community of friends and colleagues from the university and my late wife's practice. An engagement was a major event, a chance for the community to share in the joy. Lena's bright smile faltered for just a fraction of a second, but in the soft lamplight I saw it. She shifted in her seat, suddenly fascinated by the steam rising from her coffee cup. Her eyes didn't quite meet mine. "Oh, of course," she said, her voice suddenly vague, a subtle but distinct change in tone. "Kevin's parents are handling the initial arrangements. Things are a bit up in the air at the moment with scheduling and venues and everything." She waved a hand dismissively, as if swatting away an insignificant fly. "It's all very complicated. But don't worry, we'll let you know as soon as everything is finalized. We'll let you know." The words were polite, but the message was clear. I was no longer a participant. I was now on the mailing list, an attendee in waiting to be informed of the details of my own daughter's celebration at her convenience. I didn't press her. I simply nodded, a history professor, recognizing a pattern. This was a classic strategy of exclusion. You don't declare war. You simply stop sharing intelligence. You create a separate chain of command. You isolate the target until they are rendered irrelevant. It was a cold and calculated maneuver, and I could feel Kevin's fingerprints all over it. As I finished my coffee in silence, the album I was creating for her, the one filled with pictures of generations of hardworking Colemans, suddenly felt like a historical document from a civilization that was about to be conquered. The invisible wall was now complete, and I was standing on the wrong side of it. A week passed, a week of profound and deliberate silence. Lena did not call to let me know about any party plans, and I did not call to inquire. I understood that the invisible wall between us was now load-bearing, and to push against it would be a fruitless, undignified act. So I waited. A historian knows how to wait. I tended to my garden. I read a biography of General Grant, and I worked on the family album, my own quiet act of defiance against the Prescott-led campaign of erasure. I told myself that this was a phase, a fever of infatuation that would eventually break. But history also teaches that some annexations are permanent. I was about to find out which this was. The discovery came on a Saturday morning. I was in my study, a cup of coffee at my elbow, scrolling through the morning's news on my tablet. It had become a ritual, a way of staying connected to the world. I would occasionally glance at my social media feed, a small concession to modernity, mostly to keep up with the publications of old colleagues and the family photos of former students. It was there, nestled between a photo of my friend Professor Albright's new grandson and an article about a Roman excavation, that I saw it. Professor Albright had liked a post from a woman I didn't know, a woman named Cynthia Prescott Lowell. The name was enough to make my blood run cold, and the post was a photograph. A bright, happy, festive photograph that felt like a dagger in my heart. It had been taken at the Fairmount Park Hunt Club, a place of old money and even older pretensions. The room was opulent, all dark wood, polished brass, and the soft glow of candlelight. And in the center of it all, beaming, stood my daughter Lena. Kevin had his arm wrapped tightly around her waist, a look of smug triumph on his face. He was holding a glass of champagne high, as if toasting a successful corporate acquisition. Lena was radiant, beautiful, and smiling, a smile so wide it looked almost painful. They were surrounded by the Prescott clan, all of them impeccably dressed and radiating an aura of effortless superiority. But that wasn't the worst of it. In the background, I saw familiar faces: the dean of the history department and his wife, the son of my late wife's former dental partner, people from my world, my community, who had apparently been deemed worthy of an invitation. The caption beneath the photo, written by this Cynthia Prescott Lowell, was the final brutal twist of the knife. It read, "A simply magical evening celebrating the engagement of my wonderful nephew Kevin Prescott and the lovely Lena Coleman. Such a beautiful, intimate gathering for their nearest and dearest family and friends. Nearest and dearest." The words echoed the lie my daughter had been preparing to tell me. They had already had the party. The questions had been answered. The plans had been finalized. And I, her father, the man who had raised her, who had paid for her education, who was funding this entire extravagant affair, was not included in the circle of nearest and dearest. I stared at the screen, my coffee growing cold, the world outside my study window seeming to fade to gray. The feeling was not just sadness. It was a deep, searing humiliation. This wasn't a private slight. This was a public declaration. A statement had been made broadcast to my friends, my colleagues, my entire community. The message was clear: Charles Coleman is no longer relevant. He is outside the new power structure. He is a footnote in the story of the Prescott-Coleman merger. The pain of the past week, that dull ache of being excluded, was suddenly sharpened into a bright, hot point of anger. It was an anger so pure and so cold it felt like ice flowing through my veins. A historian knows that the first act of any conquest is to delegitimize the previous ruler, to erase their history and their influence. This party, this photograph, it was exactly that. It was a quiet, bloodless coup. And as I zoomed in on my daughter's smiling face, a face I suddenly didn't recognize, I knew that the time for quiet observation was over. The breaking point had been reached. I sat in the study for a long time, the image from the tablet burned into my mind. The happy faces, the champagne, the casual and complete erasure of my existence. A historian is trained to be dispassionate, to look at evidence and draw logical conclusions without letting emotion cloud the analysis. And the evidence here was clear, unambiguous, and brutal. A betrayal had occurred. A public statement had been made, but a historian also knows the value of a primary source. I had seen the photograph, the secondary account. Now I needed to hear the testimony from one of the principal actors. I needed to hear it in her voice. The pain had already been delivered. What I sought now was the final cold confirmation. My sadness had hardened into a resolve as solid and unyielding as granite. I picked up my phone. My hand was perfectly steady. The trembling old man who had worried about his daughter's future was gone, replaced by a man who was about to secure his own. I found Lena's number and pressed the call button, listening to the hollow digital ringing. She answered on the third ring, her voice bright and a little breathless, the sound of a person enjoying a carefree Saturday. "Hi, Dad. What's up? Everything okay?" The casual, unconcerned tone of her voice was another small piece of evidence. There was no guilt in her greeting, no anxiety that her father might have discovered her deceit. She had successfully compartmentalized her life. I was in one box, her new life with the Prescotts was in another, and she saw no reason for the two to ever touch. I kept my own voice level, calm, and academic. "Hello, Lena. I'm fine, thank you. I apologize for interrupting your weekend, but I had a quick question." I let a beat of silence pass. I was just looking at Professor Albright's social media page, and I saw a photograph he'd liked. It was from a party at the Fairmount Park Hunt Club. You and Kevin were in it. It looked like a lovely event. The silence that followed on her end of the line was profound. It was a silence filled with frantic, unspoken thoughts. I could almost hear the gears of her mind grinding, searching for an exit, a plausible lie, an explanation that would smooth over this unexpected complication. I could picture her putting a hand over the receiver, whispering frantically to Kevin. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost all its bright, casual warmth. It was strained, thin, and defensive. "Oh," that she said, as if trying to recall a distant, insignificant event. "Yes, that was nice." I did not fill the silence for her. I waited, forcing her to continue. A good historian knows that silence can often extract a confession more effectively than any question. I decided to give her one last chance to tell me the truth without being forced. "You looked very happy," I said, my voice still quiet, betraying nothing of the ice in my veins. "The pictures were beautiful. I was just wondering what time was the party. I must have misplaced the invitation." There it was, the direct question, the inescapable point of fact. She stammered the sound, a painful mix of guilt and irritation. "Dad, it wasn't a big deal, really. It was all very last minute. Kevin's aunt just threw it together." The lies were clumsy, poorly constructed, the desperate scrambling of someone caught in the act. And then finally came the truth, the phrase that would echo in my mind for days, the phrase that severed the final thread of my hope. It was yesterday," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "It was just a small thing. You know, just close family. Close family." The words landed, and I felt not a fresh wave of pain, but the cold, hard click of a lock falling into place. It was done. I was no longer a father. I was a third party, an outsider, a distant relative not included in the circle of intimacy. I did not rage. I did not yell. I gave her nothing. "I see," I said, and my voice was so calm, so devoid of emotion that it must have frightened her more than any shouting could have. "Thank you for clarifying. I hope you had a wonderful time." Before she could reply, before she could offer any more pathetic, transparent excuses, I ended the call. The house was silent again, but the nature of the silence had changed. It was no longer the silence of loneliness. It was the silence of a general's tent before the dawn of a great and terrible battle. The evidence was all in. The primary source had confirmed it. And now the historian would begin to write the next chapter. I placed the phone back in its cradle with a soft, definitive click. The connection was severed, but the echo of her words, "just close family," remained in the air, hanging in the silence of my home like a toxic vapor. I did not move for a long time. I simply sat there in my armchair, looking out the window as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the lawn. There was no rage. There was no explosive grief. The pain I felt was a thing far colder and heavier than that. It was the pain of a historian watching a civilization he loved his own being carelessly dismantled by a new ignorant regime. The anger I had felt earlier when I saw the photograph had now been supercooled by my daughter's confirmation. It had transformed from a hot, burning fire into a solid block of ice in the center of my chest. It was an anger that did not scream, but instead focused my mind with a terrible, diamond-hard clarity. I thought of the great turning points in history, the moments when a single event, a single insult, a single broken treaty changed the course of empires. A leader is pushed too far, a border is crossed, a final diplomatic channel is closed. And in that moment, the time for patience and observation ends, and the time for action begins. My daughter, in her thoughtless cruelty, had just crossed that border. She and her fiancé had made a critical miscalculation. They saw me as a relic from a past they wished to escape, a sentimental old man tied to an outdated code of honor. They had looked at my kindness and mistaken it for weakness. They had looked at my patience and mistaken it for passivity. They had forgotten that a historian more than anyone understands power, how it is acquired, how it is wielded, and how it is lost. My thoughts turned to Rose, my brilliant, beautiful wife. I could almost feel her presence in the room, her quiet strength standing beside me. She had been the true strategist in our family. While I was lost in the pages of the past, she was always planning for the future. She was the one who insisted we structure our finances so carefully, the one who saw the potential dangers of the world long before they arrived at our door. "We work hard for this, Charles," she had told me one night years ago as we sat at this very kitchen table planning our estate. "We're building a legacy, not just of money, but of values. And we have to protect it. We have to protect Lena even from her own mistakes." In that moment, her words were not a memory, but an instruction. I knew what she would have expected of me, and I knew I would not fail her. I stood up. The stiffness I usually felt in my joints was gone, burned away by the cold fire of my new purpose. My movements were no longer those of a retired professor, but of a man with a mission. I walked from the living room down the familiar hallway and into my sanctuary, the library, but I was not seeking the comfort of my books. I was seeking my armory. I walked to the far wall, the one lined with leather-bound volumes on the Roman Empire. I reached for a specific book, a biography of Marcus Aurelius, and pulled it gently from the shelf. Behind it was not more books, but a small, flush-mounted keypad. I entered a sequence of numbers, a date only Rose and I would have known. There was a soft mechanical click, and a section of the bookshelf swung inward, revealing a heavy, dark gray safe. The clicks of the combination lock turning were the only sounds in the room, each one a precise metallic beat counting down to a new reality. I swung the heavy door open and reached inside. I bypassed the boxes of old coins and the few pieces of Rose's jewelry I kept there. My fingers found what they were looking for, a thick, leather-bound portfolio embossed with a simple gold crest. I lifted it out. It felt heavy, solid, the physical weight of a lifetime of careful planning. I closed the safe, swung the bookshelf back into place, and returned the book to its position on the shelf. No one would ever know it had been opened. I carried the portfolio to my desk and laid it under the soft glow of the banker's lamp. On the cover, the gold letters were simple and elegant, the Coleman Family Trust. It was all there. Every stock, every bond, every deed, every decision Rose and I had ever made to secure our daughter's future. It was a document of love and protection. But as I looked at it now, I understood that a shield can also be a weapon. I sat down in my leather chair, opened the cover, and began to read. The time for grieving was over. The time for a history lesson had begun. I sat at my desk, the heavy leather portfolio open before me under the soft, focused glow of the banker's lamp. The pages were filled with the precise, intimidating language of the law, but to me, they read like a biography of my life with Rose. Every clause, every subsection, every carefully chosen word was a testament to our partnership, our hopes and our fears for the future. As I ran my fingers over the embossed title, the Coleman Family Trust, I remembered the nights we spent designing it with our lawyer, my old friend Charlie Jordan. I had been the historian concerned with the past, with preserving our legacy. But Rose, my pragmatic, brilliant Rose, had been the strategist, always looking to the future, always anticipating the unseen threats that lay ahead. She was the one who insisted on a revocable living trust. I had initially argued for something simpler, but she had been firm. Charles, she had said, her voice full of a fierce, protective love. We are building a wonderful life for Lena. We must ensure that it is never torn down by a fool, or worse, a predator. She understood that our daughter, with her open, generous heart, might one day be vulnerable. The trust was not a tool for controlling Lena from beyond the grave. It was designed to be a shield, a bulwark to protect her from those who might see her kindness as a weakness to be exploited. It was an act of profound and far-sighted love. And as the sole surviving trustee, the duty to wield that shield now fell to me. I turned the pages, my eyes scanning the familiar legal architecture of our life's work. It was all there. Our home, this house, was not in my name, but in the name of the trust. This meant no one could force its sale but me. Our investment portfolio, the result of 40 years of careful saving and Rose's shrewd understanding of the market, was the trust's primary asset. Our small but valuable collection of African-American art, our savings, everything of substance, was held within this legal fortress, and I was its absolute commander. As the sole trustee, I had the power to amend its terms, to redirect its funds, to add or remove beneficiaries. While I lived, I was the trust. It was a power I had never once needed to exercise, until now. Then I came to the section that detailed the establishment of a special disbursement account. Rose and I had created it with a specific purpose in mind. We wanted Lena to experience the freedom and security that our hard work had provided. We didn't want her to have to ask for money for the big, important moments in her life. This account was to be used for her higher education, a down payment on her first home, and of course her wedding. And to make accessing it seamless, we had linked the account to a single line of credit, an American Express Centurion card, the so-called black card. At the time, it had seemed like a perfect solution, a tool of immense generosity, a way for us to provide for her, to give her the best without question. We gave it to her when she graduated from her master's program, a symbol of our pride and love. But as I sat there, the silence of the house pressing in on me, I realized the profound and dangerous miscalculation we had made. Over the years, Lena had come to see the card not as a privilege, but as a right. She saw it as her card funded by her money. She had forgotten, or perhaps had never truly understood, that the card was merely a key to a vault that I alone controlled. The unlimited budget she had bragged about to Kevin was not hers, it was the trust's. And the trust was mine. The very tool we had designed to give her a beautiful life was now being used to finance her disconnection from the family that had provided it. The shield Rose and I had so carefully constructed would now have to be used in the way we had always feared, but always prepared for. It would have to be used to protect our daughter from her own disastrous choices. I closed the portfolio. The analysis was complete. I knew my rights. I knew my power. And now, I knew my duty. The next morning, I did not drive to a gleaming skyscraper downtown. Instead, I drove to a quiet, tree-lined street in Mount Airy, a neighborhood of old stone houses and even older principals. The law offices of Brenda Fields were located in one of these houses, a place that felt more like a home than a corporate headquarters. There were no glass walls or minimalist furniture, only overflowing bookshelves, comfortable leather armchairs, and the rich scent of old books and brewing coffee. On the wall behind her desk was a framed photograph of Brenda, my late wife Rose, and two other women, all of them young, brilliant, and full of fire, celebrating their graduation from law school. Brenda was not just my lawyer, she was family. She had been Rose's closest friend, a sister in all but name, and the godmother to my Lena. She greeted me not with a handshake, but with a warm, concerned hug. "Charles," she said, her voice full of the deep, unwavering calm that had always been her trademark. "I got your message. Sit. Tell me what's wrong." "You sounded resolute." I sat in the armchair opposite her desk, the worn leather sighing under my weight. I didn't waste time with small talk. I simply took out my tablet, opened the picture of the engagement party, and slid it across the desk to her. She looked at it for a long moment, her sharp, intelligent eyes taking in every detail. The opulent room, the triumphant look on Kevin's face, the familiar faces of mutual friends in the background, and the glaring, obvious absence of my own. She slid the tablet back to me, her expression a mixture of sadness and a deep, simmering anger on my behalf. "And Lena's explanation," she asked, her voice soft. "Just close family." I replied, the words still tasting like poison. Brenda leaned back in her chair and let out a long, slow breath. She looked at the photograph of her and Rose on the wall. "Rose was worried this day might come," she said quietly. "Not this exact scenario, of course, but she was always worried that Lena's heart was bigger than her ability to see the predators of this world." "Do you remember why we structured the trust the way we did, Charles?" Of course I remembered. The conversations had stretched over months, late into the night, fueled by coffee and Rose's fierce determination to protect the future of the daughter she adored. I had been focused on providing for Lena. But Rose, she was focused on protecting her. She said that inherited wealth can be a blessing or a curse. I recalled my voice thick with the memory. She said it can be a foundation to build a life on or a target painted on your back. She wanted Lena to have the foundation, but she wanted to protect her from the people who would see her as a target. Exactly. Brenda affirmed, her voice becoming stronger, more lawyerly. This trust, she gestured to a thick-bound document on her shelf that I knew was our file, was never about control. It was about creating a shield. Rose was adamant. The trust would provide for Lena's every need. Her education, her housing, a wedding fit for a queen if that's what she wanted. But the core assets, the principle of your life's work, were to remain untouchable, managed by you. It was designed to give Lena a life of comfort and freedom without giving a potential spouse a blank check to our family's entire net worth. We sat in silence for a moment, two old friends sharing in the memory of a brilliant woman's foresight. Her fears, once a hypothetical exercise in estate planning, had now become a living, breathing crisis. "He called my house a dormant asset, Brenda." I said, the memory still fresh and infuriating. "He talks about my legacy as if it's a stock to be liquidated for a higher return." Brenda's expression hardened. "He's a fool, Charles, a dangerous, greedy fool. He sees the beautiful house Rose designed, and all he can think about is its market value. He sees your daughter, a woman of intelligence and substance, and all he sees is a conduit to a comfortable life." The conversation was clarifying, solidifying the resolve that had formed in my study the day before. This was not just a wounded father's anger, this was my duty. It was the fulfillment of a promise I had made to my wife. I was the steward of her legacy, the wielder of the shield she had so carefully designed. And the first step of any good historian or any good general is to understand the enemy. "Brenda," I said, my voice now clear and firm, all trace of grief replaced by a cold strategic purpose. "Before we take any official action regarding the trust, I need to know exactly who we are dealing with. I am no longer operating on instinct. I need facts. I need you to conduct a thorough, discreet financial background check on Mr. Kevin Prescott. I want to know everything. His debts, his assets, his investment history, his business associates. I want a complete portrait of the man who has so captivated my daughter." Brenda nodded, a grim smile touching her lips for the first time. "Consider it done, Charles," she said. "Let's see what the numbers have to say about this man's character." 3 days later, I found myself back in Brenda Fields' office, sitting in the same comfortable leather armchair. But the atmosphere was different. The warmth of our previous meeting, a meeting of old friends reminiscing, had been replaced by a cold, somber gravity. On the desk between us lay a single thick file folder. It was closed. It felt like a verdict waiting to be read. Brenda had a grim professional expression on her face, the look of a doctor about to deliver bad news. She had completed her research into the life of Mr. Kevin Prescott. "I have the information you requested, Charles," she began, her voice low and even. "I must warn you, it isn't pleasant. On the surface, the man is exactly as he appears, a successful financial consultant with a polished resume and the right social connections. But the reality is a house of cards in a hurricane." She opened the folder. She didn't editorialize. She simply presented the facts one after another, each one a hammer blow against the carefully constructed image of my daughter's fiancé. "First, let's talk about debt," she said, sliding a single sheet of paper across the desk. It was a list of figures, a symphony of financial desperation. Mr. Prescott is carrying over $150,000 in high-interest credit card debt spread across 6 different cards. He has a $75,000 personal loan from a high-risk lender for which he has missed the last 2 payments. The luxury car he drives is leased and he is 3 months behind on those payments as well. To put it simply, Charles, he is functionally insolvent. I stared at the numbers, but I was picturing the expensive restaurant, the ostentatious watch, the casual way he had ordered the most expensive bottle of wine. It was all a performance. A meticulously staged play funded by debt and deceit, and my daughter was not just the audience. She was intended to be the final act, the financial rescue that would save the whole production from ruin. "What about his business?" I asked, my voice steady, despite the cold knot tightening in my stomach. His consultancy firm, Brenda, turned to the next page in her file. Prescott Financial Solutions is a registered LLC, but it's a shell, a one-man operation with a fancy website and virtually no client revenue for the past 18 months. His primary source of income seems to have been a series of failed ventures. She then laid out the history. A tech startup that had burned through $500,000 of investor money before collapsing in 2022, leaving a trail of angry partners. A foray into real estate development that ended in a lawsuit. It was a pattern, a clear and undeniable history of reckless ambition, poor judgment, and a talent for convincing others to foot the bill for his failures. He wasn't a builder. He was a gambler who had run out of other people's money to bet with. The man who had lectured me on unlocking the value of my assets didn't have any of his own. I leaned back in my chair, the leather sighing. I was not surprised. My historian's instincts had told me this was the case. But seeing it all laid out in cold, hard numbers was different. The vague sense of unease had been replaced by a stark, terrifying certainty. This wasn't just a man with different values. This was a predator, a sophisticated con artist who had identified my daughter's greatest vulnerability, her desire to be loved, and her naive belief in the goodness of others. My fear was no longer for my legacy or my home, it was for her. I pictured her bright, trusting smile, and I felt a wave of protective fury so intense it almost took my breath away. Rose had been right. The shield had to be used. Brenda watched me, her eyes full of a sad understanding. "He's in a desperate situation, Charles," she said softly, and he saw Lena and the Coleman family name as his golden parachute. "He's not just marrying her, he's planning a hostile takeover of her future." The words hung in the air, ugly and true. The time for deliberation was over. The facts had been gathered. The enemy had been identified. All that remained was the counterattack. I leaned forward, my hands flat on her desk. My voice when I spoke was devoid of all hesitation. "Thank you, Brenda. This is exactly what I needed to know." I nodded toward the thick, bound file on her shelf, the one with our family name on it. "Now please pull up the file for the Coleman Family Trust. It is time to make some amendments." I looked at the damning file on Brenda's desk, a neat and tidy summary of a deceitful life. The portrait of Kevin Prescott was complete, and it was the portrait of a desperate man, a man who saw my daughter not as a partner but as a lifeline. My instincts had been correct. But as a historian, I knew that instinct without evidence is merely opinion. Now I had the evidence. Cold, hard, undeniable facts. And with those facts came a duty to act. The shield that Rose and I had so carefully constructed all those years ago now had to be raised. The time for passive observation was over. The time for a quiet, precise, and decisive intervention had come. Brenda watched me, her expression patient, waiting for my next move. She knew me well enough to know that my silence was not one of indecision. It was the silence of a man weighing his options, calculating the consequences of each possible path. Finally, I looked up from the file and met her gaze. "I am not going to disinherit my daughter, Brenda," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "Let's be clear about that. This is not about punishment. This is about protection. The purpose here is to re-engage the shield that Rose and I built. The purpose is to protect Lena from her own blindness and from this predator." I pushed the file on Kevin aside, a gesture of dismissal. "He is a temporary problem. My daughter is my permanent concern." "I understand completely, Charles," she said, her voice full of support. "So what is your instruction?" I leaned forward, my hands flat on her desk, the same way I used to lean on a lectern when I was about to make a critical point in a lecture. "I want you to draft an amendment to the Coleman Family Trust," I said. "A new clause. We can call it the Prudent Expense Clause. A small, grim smile touched Brenda's lips. She appreciated the academic touch. "It will be simple and direct," I continued. "It will state that any single expenditure from the special disbursement account exceeding the sum of $5,000 will require the prior written and notarized consent of the sole trustee." I tapped my chest. Me, no exceptions. Brenda nodded slowly, her legal mind already analyzing the move. "It's a smart move, Charles," she said, her voice full of professional admiration. "It's not a blunt instrument. It doesn't cut her off from day-to-day funds. It doesn't scream revenge. It's a surgical strike aimed directly at the kind of large-scale, reckless spending a wedding like the one they're planning would require. It's legally unassailable. You are acting well within your full rights as trustee to protect the assets of the trust from what can clearly be defined as a potential undue influence." Her validation was comforting, but the weight of the decision was still heavy on my soul. I was about to create a conflict that would likely break my daughter's heart, at least for a time. But as I looked at the file with Kevin's name on it, I knew that a broken heart was infinitely better than a broken life. And the credit card linked to the account Brenda asked, anticipating my next thought. The American Express card. Its direct unchecked access must be suspended immediately pending the implementation of the new clause I confirmed. The key to the vault can no longer be left in the hands of someone who would so willingly share it with a thief. Brenda made a note on a legal pad, her pen scratching in the quiet room. The sound seemed unnaturally loud, the sound of a plan being etched into reality. I felt a deep, profound sadness in that moment. I was using the very structure Rose and I had built out of love as a weapon against our own child. There was a terrible, bitter irony in it, but I also felt the quiet strength of my wife's presence, as if she were standing beside me, nodding in approval. We had always been a team, and even now, years after her passing, we were still working together to protect our family. I stood up. The decision made the wheels of my counterplan now officially in motion. "Draft the amendment, Brenda," I said. "I'll come back tomorrow to sign it." She stood up as well. "It will be ready." "Charles," she promised. As I turned to leave, my eyes fell on the photograph of her and Rose on the wall, two young women ready to take on the world. I felt that I had honored her memory today. I had chosen the difficult path of a protector over the easy path of a passive victim. I was about to teach my daughter a hard lesson in history, a lesson about the difference between a partner and a parasite, and I could only pray that one day she would understand that I had done it all out of love. The following day I returned to Brenda's office. The winter sun was weak, casting long, pale shadows across the city. The amendment to the trust was laid out on her large mahogany desk, a few pages of dense legal text that held the weight of a lifetime. Brenda slid the document across to me along with a heavy, old-fashioned fountain pen. "Are you sure about this, Charles?" she asked, her voice soft, giving me one final opportunity to turn back. I looked at the photograph of her and Rose on the wall, and I felt my wife's resolute spirit beside me. I was not just sure. I was certain. I was acting on her behalf as much as my own. I picked up the pen, uncapped it, and signed my name at the bottom of the page. My signature was not the shaky scrawl of an old man. It was a firm, deliberate, and unwavering line, the hand of a historian making his own mark on the course of events. Brenda notarized the signature with a heavy, satisfying stamp, and the deed was done. The first part of the trap had been set. The days that followed were some of the longest of my life. On the surface, nothing had changed. I went about my quiet routines. I spent the mornings in my library, the afternoons in my small garden preparing the soil for spring, and the evenings working on the family album. But beneath the calm surface of my life, there was a new thrumming tension. It was the quiet, nerve-wracking suspense of a general who has given his orders and must now wait for the battle to begin. I was waiting for the phone to ring. I was waiting for the moment when my daughter's world of blissful, arrogant ignorance would collide with the hard, cold reality I had just engineered. There were moments of doubt, of course. Late at night, in the quiet of the house, I would look at a photograph of Lena as a little girl. Her face full of innocent joy, and a wave of fatherly guilt would wash over me. I was about to cause her immense pain and public humiliation. Was this the right way? Was there a gentler path? But then I would remember the cold, dismissive tone in her voice on the phone. I would picture the smug, triumphant look on Kevin's face in the photograph. and I would open the file Brenda had given me, the one that detailed his mountain of debt and his history of failures. I was not acting out of spite. I was performing a painful but necessary surgery to remove a cancer before it could consume my daughter entirely. My resolve would harden once more. I was a historian. I knew that appeasement only emboldens aggressors. A boundary had been crossed, and it was my duty to re-establish it with absolute, unshakable force. A week after I had signed the amendment, Brenda called me. "It's done, Charles," she said, her voice all business. "The amendment has been officially filed with the court and is now a legally binding part of the Coleman family trust." I felt a grim sense of finality. The legal machinery was now in place. "Thank you, Brenda," I said. There was a pause on the line. She knew what the next question was. "There is one final step, Charles," she said, her voice softening slightly. "The instruction to the bank. The American Express card is still active. Are you ready for me to make the call?" This was it. The point of no return. Signing the document was the strategy. This was the tactical execution. This was the final turn of the key that would spring the trap. I stood up from my desk and walked to the library window looking out at the city. Somewhere out there, Lena and Kevin were likely at another expensive restaurant or perhaps a boutique spending money they didn't have, building a future on a foundation of lies, completely unaware that their financial world was about to cease to exist. I took a deep, steadying breath. The time for doubt was over. "Yes, Brenda," I said, my voice as calm and clear as a winter morning. "Make the call. Deactivate the card. Immediately." I heard the soft click of her keyboard as she made a note. "Consider it done," she replied. We spoke for a few more minutes about trivialities, but my mind was elsewhere. When I hung up the phone, the house felt different. The waiting was over. The trap was now live. I had set a complex piece of machinery in motion, and now I could only wait for the inevitable catastrophic result. I was no longer a participant in the drama. I was its silent, unseen author, waiting for the actors to speak the lines I had written for them. While I sat in the quiet of my library, the order given the trap said a different scene was playing out across town. I know this part of the story not because I was there, but because the aftermath was so catastrophic that the details became painfully clear later. It was a scene of breathtaking arrogance, the final sun-drenched afternoon of an empire just before it crumbled into dust. I picture them at the Bellevue, that grand old hotel in the heart of the city, a place that has always catered to the old money of Philadelphia. They weren't there for a quiet cup of tea. They were in the main ballroom, a cavernous space of glittering chandeliers and gilded ceilings, meeting with the city's most sought-after wedding planner. Kevin would have been in his element, of course, playing the part of the magnanimous, wealthy fiancé. He would have walked the room with a proprietary air as if he already owned the place, pointing out changes he wanted made, dismissing the planner's concerns about cost with a casual wave of his hand. I can almost hear him. "No, no," he'd say, rejecting a perfectly good floral arrangement. "We need something with more impact. I want orchids. Thousands of them. Don't worry about the price. This is a day for a statement." He was not planning a wedding. He was staging a coronation, and my daughter was to be his queen, the beautiful accessory that legitimized his claim to a throne funded by my life's work. And Lena, my Lena, would have been completely captivated, swept up in the whirlwind of his confidence. She would have seen his reckless spending not as a red flag, but as a grand romantic gesture, a testament to the depth of his love for her. She would have agreed with all his extravagant choices, her eyes shining with the thrill of it all. "Oh, that's perfect, Kevin," she would exclaim, as he selected the most expensive champagne on the menu. "It will be an event no one will ever forget." I imagine her turning to the wedding planner with a reassuring smile, a smile of innocent, unearned privilege. "My father won't mind the cost," she would have said with complete sincerity. "He has always said he just wants me to be happy." That line, the one I can hear so clearly in my mind, is the one that hurts the most. She was using my love, my genuine fatherly devotion, as the justification for her own blindness. She had taken the purest thing I had ever given her and turned it into collateral for a loan of vanity and ambition. They would have spent hours like this lost in their fantasy. They would have chosen the 10-piece band over the string quartet, the imported caviar over the domestic, the custom-designed ice sculpture. With every choice, they were digging their financial grave a little deeper, all while believing they were building a monument to their own importance. The wedding planner, a professional accustomed to dealing with the wealthy, would have been dazzled seeing them as the dream clients, the ones with an unlimited budget and a desire for the absolute best. Finally, after the decisions had been made, the planner would have presented them with the contract and the initial deposit schedule. It would have been a staggering sum, enough to buy a small house in a less fashionable part of the city. I can see Kevin looking at the number on the page, not with alarm, but with a deep sense of satisfaction. This number was proof of his success, a validation of his arrival into the world he so desperately wanted to inhabit. He would have looked at Lena, his smile full of practiced charm, and said, "Well, my love, shall we make it official?" He would have reached into his tailored jacket, his movement smooth and theatrical, and pulled out the sleek black American Express card. He would have held it for a moment between his fingers, a small piece of plastic that represented his complete and total victory. He would have handed it to the planner with a flourish, the final triumphant gesture of a man who believed he had just conquered the world. The moment of hubris is always followed by the moment of reckoning. A historian knows this better than anyone. For every overconfident emperor who crosses a river, there is a disastrous battle waiting on the other side. For Kevin and my daughter, their Rubicon was a small, elegant payment terminal in a grand hotel, and their disastrous battle was about to be fought not with swords, but with the cold, unforgiving logic of a bank's computer system. The wedding planner, a woman named Ms. Dubois, took the black card from Kevin with a practiced, deferential smile. She had no doubt handled cards like this 1,000 times. It was the symbol of a client for whom money was not an object, a promise of a smooth and lucrative transaction. She turned to the terminal and swiped the card with a smooth, efficient motion. There was a small, almost inaudible beep, and a discreet red light appeared on the screen. Ms. Dubois's professional smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. "Oh, my apologies," she said, her voice a little too bright. "These machines can be so temperamental. Let me try that one more time." Kevin laughed, a loud, arrogant sound that echoed in the grand ballroom. "I'm not surprised," he said. "The machine is probably intimidated by the size of the deposit." Lena laughed with him, a high, tinkling sound that was full of the same unshakable confidence. They were the stars of their own movie, and in their script, there was no room for complications like this. Ms. Dubois swiped the card again. This time she did it more slowly, more deliberately. The result was the same quiet beep, the same insistent red light. Her smile was gone now, replaced by a tight, uncomfortable line. "I am so sorry, Mr. Prescott," she said, her voice now a formal, cautious whisper. "The charge is being declined." The word hung in the air between them, ugly and impossible. "Declined. Declined." Lena repeated, her voice sharp with the indignation of a person who has never had a request denied in her life. "That's impossible. That's a Centurion card. There is no limit. You must be doing it wrong. Please try it again." Ms. Dubois, to her credit, remained professional, but her discomfort was obvious. A few other staff members had begun to notice the tense little drama unfolding at the payment table. "Ma'am," she said softly, "I've run it twice. Perhaps it would be best if you called the issuing bank. I'm sure it's just a simple security flag." Kevin's charming facade was beginning to crack. A bead of sweat appeared on his temple. He looked at Lena, his expression no longer one of adoration but of impatient command. "Well, call them," he hissed. Lena fumbled in her purse for her phone, her fingers suddenly clumsy. She walked a few feet away, her back to the room, her voice a tense, angry whisper. I can picture her on that call, her initial tone one of imperious annoyance, expecting an immediate apology and a quick resolution. I can imagine that tone slowly changing as the person on the other end of the line, a calm, anonymous bank employee, began to explain the situation. I can see her face shifting through the stages of disbelief. "What do you mean the account has been suspended?" "No, there must be a mistake." "By whom?" "The primary account holder." There would have been a long, terrible pause. And then I can see the final devastating realization dawning in her eyes, the color draining from her face, as she whispered the unbelievable truth. "My father. That's impossible." She ended the call without another word. She turned around slowly, her face a mask of white, shocked horror. She looked at Kevin, who was now staring at her, his own face a thunderous cloud of rage and dawning panic. The fantasy had evaporated. The magic was gone. Ms. Dubois, sensing the collapse, stepped forward with a quiet, final grace. "Perhaps," she said, already picking up the unsigned contract from the table, It would be best if we reschedule this meeting once you have your finances in order. It was a polite professional dismissal, but it was a dismissal nonetheless. They were being ushered out of the dream. As I picture them leaving that grand ballroom, not as the conquering heroes they had entered, but as defeated pretenders, I feel a deep and profound sadness. The first part of the lesson had been delivered, and I knew with the certainty of a historian predicting the fall of an empire that my phone was about to ring. I did not have to wait long. I was in my library, the house silent around me when my phone began to ring. The screen lit up with her name, Lena. I looked at it for a moment, a historian observing the first predictable consequence of a major event. I was not nervous. I was not angry. I was simply ready. I let it ring 3 times before I answered a small but significant gesture of control. I did not want to seem too eager. I answered the call and said nothing, waiting for the inevitable storm to break. It did not take long. She did not say hello. She did not ask how I was. She simply erupted, her voice a frantic, high-pitched torrent of panic and rage. "Dad. Thank God, something is wrong with the card. You have to fix it." Now I could hear the sound of traffic in the background, the sharp, angry honk of a car horn. They must have been in a taxi, fleeing the scene of their humiliation. They declined it. She almost shrieked, her voice cracking with disbelief. In front of everyone, Ms. Dubois, the staff, everyone was staring. "Kevin is furious. You have to call the bank right now and tell them to approve the charge. Did you forget to pay the bill?" Is that what happened? That was the question. The beautifully naive, breathtakingly arrogant question that laid her entire worldview bare. In her mind, I was not a strategic actor. I was a forgetful old man, a doddering ATM who had malfunctioned at a critical moment. She did not see my action. She only saw her inconvenience. I let her finish her frantic tirade, the silence on my end of the line stretching, amplifying her panic. When she finally ran out of breath, I spoke. My voice was quiet, calm, and deliberate. "No, Lena." I said each word chosen with care. I did not forget to pay the bill. "The account is in perfect standing." Her frantic energy was suddenly replaced by a sharp, confused silence. I had not given her the answer she expected. I had taken away the simple, easy explanation for her problem, what she finally stammered. Then what happened? Was it a fraud alert? A security issue? "Dad, whatever it is, you have to fix it. We have to go back there and fix this. They think we can't afford it." The desperation in her voice was palpable. Her entire identity, the one she had so carefully constructed with Kevin, was built on the perception of wealth, and that perception had just been shattered. I let another moment of silence pass, allowing her to truly feel the loss of control, the terror of her situation. It was time for the lesson to begin. "There is nothing to fix, Lena." I said, my voice still quiet, but now with an edge of cold, hard history to it. This was not an accident. This was a decision, and it was a decision I was forced to make. I could hear her sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. The confusion was now morphing into a dawning, horrifying suspicion. And then I delivered the line that connected this disastrous present to the ignored wisdom of the past. "But I did warn you, didn't I, my dear?" I said, my voice full of a sad paternal finality. "I warned you what would happen when you started dealing with a man who was more interested in your ledger than in your heart." The silence that followed was absolute. I had just confirmed her worst fear. This was not a mistake. This was a consequence. I could hear Kevin's angry, muffled voice in the background demanding to know what I had said. But Lena was speechless. The entitled, angry woman who had started the call was gone, replaced by a terrified girl who had just realized the ground beneath her feet was not solid. She had been living in a house built by her father, and she had just learned that her father could at any time revoke the key to the front door. The silence on the other end of the line was a vast empty space, a vacuum where my daughter's entire reality was being turned inside out. I had not shouted. I had not accused. I had simply stated a fact connecting her present crisis to her past choices, and in doing so, I had taken away all of her power. She was no longer the aggrieved party, the victim of a banking error or a forgetful father. She was the one who had been warned. I could hear her sharp, ragged breathing, and then for the first time I heard his true voice. It was not the smooth, charming baritone of the financial consultant. It was the raw, panicked snarl of a gambler whose sure bet had just collapsed. "What is he saying?" Kevin's voice demanded in the background, muffled but clear. "What did he do?" "Tell him to fix it, Lena. Tell him to fix it now." His panic seemed to snap her out of her shock. When she spoke again, the entitled anger was gone, replaced by a thin, desperate pleading tone I hadn't heard since she was a little girl who had broken a favorite vase. "Dad, what did you do?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Why would you do this to me? This is my wedding. You're ruining everything." The accusation was still there, but it was hollow now, the desperate cry of someone who knows they have already lost the argument. I did not soften. The time for softness was over. This was a lesson that had to be learned, a surgery that had to be completed. "I have done nothing, Lena, except enforce the terms of the foundation your entire life has been built upon," I said, my voice still calm, still measured. I was a professor again, explaining a difficult but essential concept to a student who did not wish to hear it. That credit card, my dear, was never your money. It was and has always been a privilege, a key to an account extended to you from the Coleman Family Trust. And that trust, I paused, letting the words sink in, was built by your mother and me on a foundation of mutual love and respect. I could hear a sob catch in her throat. When you stood by and allowed me to be excluded from your close family, you took a hammer to that foundation. You chose to break that sacred trust. Therefore, the privileges that came with it are now and will henceforth be suspended. Suspended? She repeated the word, a question mark of pure disbelief. What does that mean? In the background, I heard Kevin again, his voice louder, more frantic. What does suspended mean? Ask him. It means... I continued, ignoring his frantic squawking, that access to the trust's funds is now conditional upon the trustee's written approval for any significant expense. I had the terms legally amended. The shield your mother designed is now fully engaged. I let her absorb the full, devastating meaning of my words. The unlimited budget was gone. The blank check had been revoked. Her dream wedding, Kevin's dream wedding, had vanished in a puff of legal smoke. Before she could form a response, I took final control of the situation. We are not going to discuss the details of a multi-million-dollar trust over the phone, like squabbling children. I said, my voice hardening with an authority she had not heard from me in decades. This conversation is over, for now. I laid out my terms not as a request, but as a summons. You and Kevin will come to my house, my library, tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. If you wish to have any hope of understanding the new terms of your future, you will be there. On time. I did not wait for her to agree. I did not wait to hear another word from the panicked con man in the background. I simply ended the call, the final click echoing in the profound silence of my study. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been completely and irrevocably inverted. I was no longer the irrelevant old man. I was the gatekeeper, and they were, for the first time in their lives, about to have to ask for permission to enter. The next morning at precisely 10 o'clock, they arrived. I received them not in the living room, but in my library, the heart of my home and the seat of my authority. Brenda Field sat quietly in a chair by the fireplace, a silent professional witness. Lena entered first, her face pale and drawn, her eyes red-rimmed and full of a terrified confusion. Kevin followed her, his usual confident swagger replaced by a stiff, belligerent anger. He was a cornered animal, and he was trying to project an aura of defiance, but all I saw was fear. They sat in the two chairs opposite my desk. I did not begin with a lecture or an accusation. A historian presents evidence. I simply took the file folder Brenda had prepared, the one detailing Kevin's financial ruin, and slid it silently across the polished surface of my desk toward my daughter. Before we speak, I said, my voice calm and even, I believe you should read this. Lena hesitated, looking at Kevin, who shot her a warning glance. Don't, he snapped. It's an invasion of privacy. He has no right. I ignored him, my eyes fixed on my daughter. You have every right to the truth, Lena, I said softly. Her hand trembled as she opened the folder. I watched her face as she read. I saw the initial flicker of confusion give way to a dawning, sickening comprehension. Her eyes scanned the pages, listing the mountains of credit card debt, the defaulted loans, the failed businesses. The entire carefully constructed illusion of Kevin's success evaporated in the cold, hard light of those numbers. When she finally looked up, her face was a mask of utter devastation. She looked at the man beside her as if seeing a stranger for the first time. Lena, I said, my voice gentle but firm. The man sitting next to you is a predator who is deep in debt and sees you as his financial rescue. The father sitting across from you is the man who has loved and protected you your entire life. The choice is yours. Him and a wedding built on his lies, or me and a future built on the truth. The silence in the library that morning was the sound of a life breaking apart. But history teaches us that destruction is often followed by a period of quiet rebuilding. 3 months later, the wedding was a canceled contract, and Kevin Prescott was just a painful memory, a ghost of a future that thankfully never came to be. The seasons had turned and spring had arrived, breathing new life into the old trees outside my window. Lena was with me in the library. There were no tears, no grand apologies. The wounds were too deep for that. Instead, there was a quiet, fragile peace between us. I opened the gift I had been working on all those months ago, the heavy leather-bound album of our family's history, and placed it on the table between us. We turned the pages together in a comfortable silence. Her finger gently traced the photograph of my grandfather in front of his barber shop. He looked so proud she whispered, her voice thick with an emotion she couldn't yet name. She looked at me, then her eyes full of a new, hard-won understanding. "You tried to tell me, Dad." I simply nodded, placing my hand over hers. The wall between us was gone. The relationship we had was not the one we'd had before, but it was something new, something stronger, built not on easy assumptions, but on the hard, solid ground of the truth. And as we sat there, father and daughter, turning the pages of our shared past, I knew our future had a chance to be written again. Respect is the invisible currency of family. It cannot be inherited or demanded, only earned through action and given freely through love. When we begin to treat people as entries on a balance sheet, we devalue both them and ourselves. True wealth is not the trust fund you are given, but the trust you build with those who mattered from the very beginning. A boundary drawn in the name of self-respect is not an act of cruelty, but a necessary lesson in value, reminding others that your love is a priceless gift, not a transaction. Thank you for allowing me to share my story with you. It was a difficult chapter in my life, but one that taught me the profound importance of boundaries even with those we love the most. I am curious to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice to protect a loved one even from themselves? Please share your wisdom and experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, show your support by liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more stories about the complexities of family and life. And finally, it would bring me joy to know where you are listening from today. Thank you for your time.